All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Today we'll be covering private lending within your IRAs. Again, if you do have any questions, please make sure to type those into the chat box down below. I'll address those as we get through it. Keep in mind, even if the question you have maybe is a little bit off topic, I'm always happy to answer those, so feel free to ask away. My name is Alex Perny. I'll be your presenter today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out or email or call me directly. I'm always happy to answer any questions. I've been doing this for about 10 years exactly right now, so I got a lot of experience in the first part of my career in actually handling transactional matters for clients, actually processing investments, looking through paperwork, and doing that. I have about 1,200 or so individual deals that I've done for clients directly, covering everything from private lending in all forms and fashions, direct real estate investment, commercial multifamily, private stock and offerings and things like that. So I have a lot of experience with the broad spectrum of what you can do with these accounts. So again, feel free to ask questions. Again, even if they're a little bit off topic, I am certainly happy to address those. A little bit of a disclaimer before we really get into the meat of this. Advanta IRA and our employees do not provide investment advice, nor do we endorse or promote any investment products. All informational materials are for educational purposes only, and all parties are encouraged to consult with their attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors before entering into any type of investment. A few key points to take away from today. I want people to understand that really there's a lot of different types of accounts you can use to invest within the scope of self-direction. It's not simply just a traditional or Roth IRA. There's a lot of options out there on how to do this, that you get to choose the investment and the underlying security for whatever loan that you're doing, whether there is security or not, and also whom you invest with. And then also the terms of the note are not something that we as Advanta nor do the IRS have any particular guidance on. So long as you're not violating any type of usury rules, such as every single state is going to have a certain amount of interest that can be calculated on a particular loan that is made. So long as you're basically not violating usury or any larger like lending laws, really the terms of the loan are for you and the borrower to set. So it's not something that we're going to come in and police. If you have a deal that you think can make money and it works for everyone, then power to you. We'll do our best to help make that a accomplishable goal within your IRA. So again, some of the key points to take away from today, I think that are really salient to what we're going to be covering are right there up on the screen. A little bit about Advanta. We're a self-directed IRA plan administrator that's serving clients nationwide. We have over $2 billion of assets under administration and almost 20 years of industry experience that we like to use to bring to our clients to help them make the most informed decisions and also to structure investments in the best way possible that gets them to their goals, basically, in the manner that they are looking to do. Let's see. So one question, Kevin. Yes, we will cover at least the rules with regarding specifics on whom you can and can't lend to. If you're looking to learn a little bit more about exactly what goes on within self-directed IRAs or just investing in general, we'd like to make sure that we have a large library of educational materials for our clients and non-clients alike. You don't have to be a client to get access to our educational platform. We feel it's very important for our education to be free and accessible across anything that we do. So there's no type of paywall or any other type of barrier to entry. Simply just sign up and you can attend. We also have all of our webinars are going to be cataloged on our YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com/AdvantaLargo, you can find them all there. There's blogs on our website, AdvantaIRA.com. And of course, our webinars, such as the one that you're attending today. We also have a really great event called Pitch, Promote, and Prosper, where if you're looking to actually find deals to make or people to invest with, granted, we do not have any type of policing on whom can attend. Everyone is making their investments on their own research and comfortability with anyone that they might meet in that, but that's held every other Friday. There'll be one next Friday. That's from 12 to 1:30-ish Eastern time. So if you'd like to attend that, that's a really great way for you to kind of, if you're looking to find an investment to make, it's a really great platform to be able to utilize. I guess thanks for someone saying that they couldn't see the slide. You should be able to see everything now. We haven't really gone through much in the way of these slides, but I will, let's see. I will go back a little bit so that way for the recording, you can see the actual disclaimer and also my contact information. So there we go. Now, okay. Now, some people are kind of under the impression that this may be kind of something that is maybe new or slightly more boutique, and they aren't necessarily familiar with the fact that self-direction has really been around since the inception of IRAs back in the 70s. The IRS does not give any inherent guidance on the specifics of what you can and can't invest in, with a very few amount of exceptions. So we'll kind of get into those in a little bit, but it's really up to the IRA custodian to determine what they will and won't allow for a particular investment on their particular platform. So here at Advanta, we specialize in offering clients the ability to invest in really anything that's not a tradable security. So again, the broader scope of this presentation will be private lending, on actually lending people money, not borrowing money with your IRA, but lending people money with your IRA for various projects and deals that they have going on. Typically, this is going to be painted in the color of something real estate related, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And we'll kind of get into that with the requirements for, or lack thereof requirements for collateral with any particular type of investment. So people saying there's audio issues, I do apologize. Everything looks like it's coming through clear on my end. So again, not necessarily sure what is particularly happening on another end of the recording. So with that said, we'll keep going on. Again, I wanted people to understand the specific types of plans that can be used for self-direction. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a traditional or Roth IRA. You really do have a large ability to choose different types of retirement plans depending on what you have. So if you have, let's say, an old 401k or an old employer plan, you can certainly use that. Those types of plans come over without any tax or penalty issue directly into a traditional IRA. So if you have any type of old retirement plan from an old employer, whether that be a private employer or something in the governmental sector like a governmental 457, or if you're in the armed forces with the thrift savings plan, all of those types of plans can come directly over into a traditional IRA nice and neat, and you'll be able to do the investments that you're looking to do directly through that IRA. Now, some people, for whatever reason, are under the misconception that you have to utilize a Roth IRA in order to be able to invest, which is certainly not the case. You certainly can use a Roth IRA, and they are very powerful tools for creating great tax advantages later on down the road, but you don't necessarily have to have a Roth IRA in order to do this. You can utilize really any type of plan that you have. Now, you can do some things like Roth conversions if you'd like to get money into these types of plans. Someone just asked about, what about inherited beneficial IRAs? Absolutely. You can certainly do an inherited IRA with self-directed investing. You don't necessarily have to be something that is directly, from your start. If you have an inherited IRA, we have plenty of people that utilize inherited IRAs to this effect. You just need to kind of be aware with the inherited IRA that you do have some provisions on, not necessarily being able to make contributions later on down the road. So if you're looking to be able to make your earned income contributions, the $6,000 or $7,000 annual contribution that you have per year, you're not going to be able to do that through a beneficiary IRA. But keep in mind that earnings attributable to any type of asset that you have within an IRA are not considered contributions. So you can invest to your heart's content with something like a beneficiary IRA, and it's not going to affect or kind of violate any of those contribution rules, because again, the rules relating to contributions are what you personally put in there, not necessarily the earnings attributable to any particular investment that you have. With that said, we also do offer self-employed business plans. So if you want to utilize something like a SEP IRA or a simple IRA, you can definitely do that. And becoming more popular are things such as health savings accounts and education savings accounts for people to utilize for investing. Specific to this topic that we're covering today of private lending, is I have a client in where I'm located here in St. Pete that has made basically only done loans through his health savings account the entire time that we've had the account here at Advanta. and basically has created a considerable amount of money and income directly to an HSA account by issuing first mortgages out of that account. So being able to use a health savings account is something that people most often don't realize that is available to them, but it is certainly something that can be a viable option if you're looking to, really kind of maximize your alternative investing platform. Health savings accounts and education savings accounts can also be a good way to do that. Another plan that we do offer here that is, it gets a lot of press, and for good reason. There are a lot of really great benefits to individual 401k plans. But if you're a self-employed individual and you're looking to bolster your retirement savings, and obviously if you're self-employed, you don't have a larger employer offering a retirement benefit package to you, is setting up your own individual retirement plan. Now that can be something like a SEP IRA or a simple IRA, but individual 401ks bring the broad spectrum of benefits of 401ks down to the micro level, with you as the individual sole proprietor or self-employed individual being able to defer compensation and earnings into that plan at a much higher rate than the $6,000 or $7,000 for traditional and Roth IRAs. So all of these types of plans that are listed up on the presentation right now can definitely be used in order to facilitate a lending type investment structure if you're looking to do that. So the different types of assets. Now, I intentionally leave this slide a little bit broad just so people can understand exactly what is out there for people. Now, again, the case studies we'll go over and kind of more of the structuring will be on loans. But again, a lot of stuff that we cover here is real estate related. So if you'd like to buy something like a single family home and do any type of project with that, it doesn't necessarily have to, again, fall in any type of predefined box or scope. You can do really anything that you'd like. So real estate being extremely popular, here are just a few of the options that people like to invest in. Now, the paper side of things. Now, this is really specific to investing in notes. So things like mortgage loans, again, certainly available to you if you'd like to hold a mortgage, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a first position. You can have any type of creative paper asset in your IRA that you'd like within reason. So you could do a mortgage loan in first position. You could hold it in second position in some type of subordination. You could even hold third positions or even farther down the ordering in a particular deal. You could even do wrap loans where different loans are wrapped in position on a particular property. But there doesn't have to be any type of security at all. You can do unsecured lending with an IRA. Granted, you're going to be taking on a considerably higher amount of risk, and the important thing to understand is that if there is any type of default with an IRA-owned asset, so in the context of lending someone money, the foreclosure action is actually entered into by the IRA directly. So the IRA itself is what's going to have to be named in the suit against the actual borrower. So any type of complaint or anything else that has to go through with regard to, let's say, a foreclosure action or suing someone if you have an unsecured note, is going to be directly done by the IRA, and the IRA is going to be responsible for paying those legal fees as well. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about what's going to make the most ideal situation for you, because if you want to invest in, let's say, something that's unsecured, granted, it has a higher degree of risk, but maybe you don't carry cash reserves enough in your IRA to possibly handle a lawsuit if you had to sue someone to collect. If you feel that it is a riskier venture, then you might need to factor that into, what exactly your strategy is with the IRA. So a lot of people tend to gravitate towards slightly more secure and known quantities when it comes to doing IRA lending. So most of them will hold a mortgage loan or something else like that, where it's a little bit more of a perceived secure investment than maybe unsecured lending. Not to say that unsecured lending isn't inherently very popular or doesn't have a place within the broader scope of investments when it comes to this. But again, paper assets are a very wide scope when it comes to what you're actually able to do when it comes to investing with paper with an IRA. And other alternatives, again, just to kind of give people the broad sense of what you can do with these accounts, everything from LLCs to oil and gas, and we've even seen people invest in farm animals. So there really is quite a large plethora there. Now, when it comes to getting in position to do this, it's basically a very simple process. You need to establish an IRA with us here at Advanta, And then we'd help facilitate the movement in a non-taxable and non-penalized manner into your IRA here at Advanta. Now, this can come, again, from a lot of different types of funding sources, old retirement plans, existing IRAs, many different types of plans can be used. And I say non-penalized is probably the most broad way to put it, because there are some taxable movements, but sometimes people want to do that. If you want to get money into a Roth IRA, we can certainly help you to do a conversion when moving from one custodian to another. So do keep that in mind. So some rules to be considerate of when it comes to investing with a self-directed IRA, and I'll color these in the shade that will be most beneficial to people that are interested in private lending. So there's things that you can't directly invest in, which would be life insurance, collectibles, and then some types of coins are allowed, but it has to be based on the trading content of the value of the bullion in that coin. And then any transaction between a disqualified person or the IRA owner directly. UBIT and UDFI really don't apply in this, but I like to keep it up there as well, just so people are kind of aware of it. Now let's start with prohibited investments. When it comes to investing and lending someone money, there's a lot of different ways that you can collateralize the loan. Now, I've seen people that have collateralized loans with prohibited investments, meaning that if the loan defaulted, their IRA couldn't necessarily collect and take possession of the underlying security on that note. Now, that's not necessarily an issue per se, because just having a secured interest in something does not indicate ownership. So just like, me personally at my house right here, that I'm, my personal residence, I own the property, but a bank holds the note, meaning that, if I don't pay them, they can, take the security back on my house. But I own this property, do whatever I want to with it. If you're, let's say, collateralizing a loan with something that is a prohibited item for an IRA, that's okay. I've seen it in the context of people securing loans with things like vehicles, or I've seen artwork used as collateral, even a collection of wine, now rare wine or valuable wine or whatever have be it. But in the context of that, if you want to do something like that, that's really kind of creative when it comes to collateral, you just need to understand that there might be issues if you were to have to collect on that, or if you were to have to foreclose that note and take on the collateral as the repayment of the debt. There could be issues down the road. So just to say that, okay, great, well, if you want collateral just because they don't maybe have a piece of real estate, but they have other items, doesn't mean you can't get creative with the underlying collateral on the note. Just have to understand that in the event of default, there might be some issues. Now, one of the questions earlier was involving whom you can and cannot deal directly with. Now, this is a really great question, because this slide right here indicates really the people that you cannot directly lend to or borrow from. So that means is that, let's say, someone on this list has an IRA and you personally want to use it for a real estate project. You'll give them first position. It'll all be dandy with regard to the deal. These are the people you cannot directly lend to or borrow from when it comes to your IRA. So mother, father, son, daughter, and spouse. So look at anyone directly up and down from you in your family tree, and that's pretty much whom you can't deal with. Also, there are some contexts in which a business entity that you own or control can borrow money from your IRA. That's a really kind of specific use case scenario, which I would encourage you to contact me directly on. But for the most part, if you are the majority owner or sole owner of a business entity, even though that the note is not being directly written to you personally, or that disqualified individual's IRA directly, or that disqualified individual directly, there still can be some issues with that. So just keep in mind that whenever you're dealing with anything that is kind of within your immediate nuclear family or a business entity owned or controlled by an immediate family member or yourself, then you really need to take a little bit more of a micro approach to examining the rules and regulations regarding that. Not to say that every single, across the board case would be prohibited, but just something that you need to, just be aware of. And just, understand that maybe a further conversation is needed. But I believe this kind of pretty well covers the, examples of what's prohibited with IRAs in this context. Again, you can't lend money or extend credit to your IRA, furnishing goods and services, or borrowing money directly personally from your IRA. Those are all kind of The key points: no self-dealing and no personal use when it comes to IRA-owned assets or lending. Now, types of private lending, there's a lot of them out there. And again, there's no kind of prescribed mode or method to, what's going to work best for you. It's really looking at the deal and looking at what you want to make happen as to what's going to be the best way to do this. Now, in the most basic sense, for those, I don't know necessarily the experience level of people on this call, are that you have two parties when it comes to borrowing money. So you have the person with the money, typically in this case is going to be your IRA, and then you have someone that needs the money. So when you lend them the money, there has to be a term of that note, meaning an agreement on behalf of the borrower to repay the note at a certain given period. So monthly, quarterly, annually, biannually, and also some type of consideration being given, and that would be the interest or other types of due consideration for essentially, why the person is giving them the money, what you're getting out of it, what your rate of return is going to be on that. And all of that can be determined between you, yourself, and the actual borrower. We're not here to kind of, again, police that. It's really kind of what makes sense the best for you. But keep in mind is that, you got to make sure that you're following state and federal laws for lending. Typically, those are going to be held under what are called usury laws. USURY. So if you want to do some research on that, just make sure that if you are looking to do something, that you don't get popped with a usury violation. Typically that doesn't happen too often, but the last thing you want to do is make a mistake. And, if something does turn sour with the loan that your IRA has made to someone, have, a judge look at it and say, well, this was in violation of usury, and put you in a bad position, even if everything was going your way otherwise. But in general, there's kind of, the 5 different types of loans I have up there, what most people elect to do with an IRA. So you can do a more traditional mortgage, meaning that your IRA lends someone money, and then the IRA directly holds that note in mortgage. So the person borrowing the money has agreed to repay it back to the IRA. In the event of default, the IRA can foreclose on the property and take that property back in as repayment for the note. Now, you can do these as 15-year, 30-year, which are the traditional kind of mortgage notes that we see in the broader context of, people buying homes, personal residences. But you can get, drill down and make it much more investor specific, 5-1 adjustable rate mortgages, even balloon notes. So you can make it to where that the payments, really for the investor makes sense, but also that you are getting a predetermined rate of return on this as well. You can also do short-term transactional funding. Typically, this does lend itself to being unsecured, but I've seen definitely people do secured short-term lending where someone only has a need for money for maybe 30 to 40 days to cover them for maybe some rehab cost on a property to get it sold, or paying off some additional underlying maybe debts from work that's been incurred and there's already a contract for sale on the property. You can do things like that. You can also do just straight unsecured promissory notes. I've seen people make a lot of these to businesses. So you can make people make payroll loans, all sorts of different stuff, but you don't necessarily have to have security. And the term of the note doesn't necessarily have to be something that falls into a predefined nice box that you've seen on the news or had experience with as well. If someone wants to borrow money for 76 days, you could lend them money on a 76-day note if you wanted to. Now, typically, people are going to do things in nice round numbers. It just makes it easy. But again, the determination on what the actual underlying terms of the note are completely up to you and the borrower. So you can really determine what's going to make the most sense, which is what's going to help the borrower be able to repay you and the term of the note, and also be able to help you make as much money as possible. Again, making sure everyone has a good fit within the construct of the deal you're putting together. Now, principal and interest is great, meaning that the underlying borrower repays the principal of the amount borrowed plus interest to your IRA, but that's not necessarily the only way to go about this. One of the cooler things that I have seen people do when it comes to lending, something I had certainly no construct of, before getting involved in self-directed IRAs, was doing what's called equity participation. Now, this is one that we're going to cover in one of the case studies, but the really cool part about what this is instead of structuring the note where the lender is going to pay, let's say, monthly against the principal and the interest on the loan, the interest on the loan might be pegged at 0, and the payments might be just against the principal only, or there may not necessarily be any payments, and it may just be a balloon note, which is triggered on sale or at a certain predetermined date. But the benefit to this is that, let's say, written into the note is that in lieu of interest payments being made on the note, because remember, it's being pegged at either, like basically zero interest, is that at the sale of the property, the underlying security on the note, the lender, in this case your IRA, would get a certain amount of the proceeds at sale. Now, typically this is pegged on the profits at sale, so the investor would recoup their basis, and any of the profits made at sale would be split up according to the term of the note. And I've seen people do extremely well with these. Granted, the property has to sell for a profit. If it doesn't sell for a profit, you need to have some other language in there that might help protect your IRA to make sure that you didn't just kind of give an interest-free loan. I've seen things like prepayment penalties if there's not a certain threshold of money received from the sale of the property. There's all sorts of different ways that you can get creative with making sure that you protect yourself on that front. But equity participation really is kind of one of the cooler things that I've seen people do. And yeah, it's just one of those things that I like to bring to you as the people consuming our content, just because I find it really interesting as well. Now, the security on the note, kind of like I mentioned, and the rules regarding whom you can and can't deal with and some of the prohibited items, doesn't necessarily have to be real estate. Some of the things that I've seen people do as well are things like farm equipment, where you have what's called a UCC filing, or a Uniform Commercial Code lien, registered against the particular piece of, let's say, rolling equipment or other commercial equipment. Things like livestock. Livestock are treated like property, and for states that have large livestock bases, I've seen people in the cattle rearing portions of Florida and parts of Texas actually lend with the security being let's say, the sale of slaughter or breeding rights to particular livestock animals. It's really interesting what you can do. So the nice thing about doing self-direction is you can take your external expertise, because let's face it, not everyone is a stock market whiz. We're not all sitting on Wall Street, but all of us typically probably have some experience in some form or fashion that we see on people making money. And you can take that experience that you have personally and extend it into what your IRA is doing, and not just be forced into buying, the latest trending stock or some type of target date fund or mutual funds and bonds and things like that. The options that open up to you when you do things like self-direction, or even more specifically lending, where you actually kind of just sit back and get your IRA gets repaid and makes a profit on that, is really kind of fun to look at it in that context. So understanding the types of private lending and the security is really important going forward. Now, the other nice part about this is that loans, unlike a lot of other stuff, are pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of complicated stuff that goes into a note and mortgage, or just a note in general. People have been lending each other money and lending things to each other and getting repaid for thousands of years. So this is a very well understood and very streamlined way to invest money. Not everyone is going to understand the intricacies of stock option trading, and even real estate can get rather complicated at times. But the underlying principle of lending something of value, in this case money, in receipt of some type of return on that money and some type of security, is a very kind of rudimentary way of investing that can be very lucrative for you as well. So establishing the note terms. In general, these are kind of the general constructs when it comes to actually establishing the note for your IRA. We got a question. Let's see what we got. Let's see. If I lend from my beneficiary IRA or Roth IRA, how does that not constitute a distribution? Great question. So if you are doing an investment through an IRA, and in this case, let's say that your IRA was investing in something like a beneficiary IRA was investing in something like stock. The purchase of that stock is not a distribution. It's just an investment of the IRA. The IRA owns it. Now, in the context of this, the same kind of construct in theory holds true. Your IRA lends someone money. The IRA's investment is a note and mortgage. Whatever that person does with it, granted, you want to make sure they're not just going to Vegas and letting it ride on red. You've lent them money for a specific purpose, so long as it's not a disqualified individual. That's just an IRA investment. There's a multitude of different investment types you can do. And because you're not taking the money personally, you're not taking it out and touching it, and putting it in your personal bank account, that's why it's not considered a distribution. It's just an investment of the underlying IRA funds into a particular type of asset. So that's how it doesn't constitute a distribution, is that you've taken no personal possession of the funds. And it's just, again, kind of going back to that principle of, what is and isn't allowed, and kind of wrapping your head around self-direction, is that the IRA custodian sets the allowable investments. So with here at Advanta, we do self-direction. We allow for those alternatives. So that's how it can be considered not a distribution. Let's see, we have a question. What is the screening process for borrowers? That's another great thing, is that you get to choose what your screening process is. Granted, you need to make sure that you're not violating any type of discriminatory lending practices when you're determining whom can be a borrower of your IRA funds. Again, so long as that they're not a immediate nuclear family member, so mother, father, son, daughter, spouse, or a business entity owner controlled by any of those people, you're really kind of free to screen them at your discretion. Again, I would always recommend that you brush up on whatever are particular, discriminatory lending laws in your state. But that's kind of, the best way to go about that. Unfortunately, we do not do investment screenings here at Advanta. We strictly just do the custodial work. We don't give any investment advice or opinions on the underlying investment for the IRA, but we could certainly refer you out to people that do, mortgage origination, and some of those people will be able to assist you with doing, some of the due diligence, but also, if you want like income verifications and other things like that, I can also assist you with doing that in a compliant manner. So great questions to ask. Again, just keeping in mind that, all of the responsibility for finding the borrower and, making sure that it's a good fit for your IRA and whatever your particular strategy is ultimately up to you. Just like everything on the note terms as well. So you get to determine the amount borrowed. You don't have to drop it into kind of certain chunks. If someone needs to borrow $23,572.20, you can lend them that exact amount of money if you would like to. There is no, kind of, again, prescription on saying, hey, you have to do things exactly in this certain way. I know I kind of keep repeating myself on that, but a lot of people have a kind of a hard time coming from the more traditional route of thinking, oh, well, let's say Tesla is trading for $500 a share. I have to buy $500 increments of it. Now, granted, there are some services that let you buy fractional shares, but I think the point is illustrated, is that in this case, you get to figure out what works best for the borrower and for you to make the return that you're looking at. You don't necessarily have to just say, okay, well, I can only charge, we can only get this much done in 5 years. You can try to make these things creative, make it work for the person borrowing the money to repay as much back to your IRA in the way of returns as you both see fit, and makes the most sense. Because if they have the ability to repay and it's a good fit, then you're going to potentially be able to make more money. So you get to determine the amount borrowed, you get to determine the rate of return, you get to determine the length of term on the note. Remember how I said if you wanted to lend for 72 days, you can do it. You could also lend for 100 years. I've seen all sorts of interesting types of loans out there. And believe me, I have seen loans that go out into 30, 40, 50, 60-year terms. Why those people are making those decisions, I don't necessarily know. But what I do know is that the flexibility of this has made it a good fit for these people to enter into these type of transactions to make some profits. And again, we don't guarantee or advertise that you can make X amount, but the nice thing is when it comes to lending, you as the client and the borrower can sit down and actually figure out what's going to work best, so you can determine what actually is going to be made by your IRA. You get to set all the parameters of the investment. There's very few other types of investment vehicles that offer you that degree of fine tuning with regard to you knowing exactly how long your money is going to be out, exactly what the security is on the actual investment, and exactly how much money you stand to make from the actual investment. Now, granted, anything in life can turn sideways, but again, very few other things offer you the degree of flexibility and the degree of shielding from things like liability that is offered by lending. Now, again, you always need to check with an attorney or someone in your particular state about liability issues. But the nice thing, especially if you're doing real estate investing, is that the lender on a note typically, and again, there are very few certainties in the U.S. legal system. If there is some type of tragic event at a property, if there's a note holder on the property, the owner of the property gets sued, not the person holding the mortgage. So that's another big benefit, especially when using IRAs, that some people perceive as a benefit of lending is that potential shield of liability that being on the paper side of things offers. Let's see. Question asked, as a client of Advanta, do we find borrowers? If you're indicating that you, as the client, you go out and find the borrower, yes, it is ultimately your responsibility to go out and find the people to borrow the money from your IRA, which does kind of lead into a nice shameless plug for our Pitch, Promote, and Prosper events. Again, that's held every other Friday. One coming up next Friday. So if you are looking to find someone to borrow money, you can kind of put it out there. If someone's interested, then you can go through whatever screening process you might find prudent to make sure that it's a good fit. Again, we don't screen anyone on that call, so it's always kind of it is unknown as to whom is going to be on there. But if you're looking to find someone, it's a good place to start. Again, benefits of it for some of these maybe more visual. You get to act as the bank and determine the terms. You also get to set the rate at which your IRA grows, and you shield from liability in the case of owning real estate directly. The other really nice thing about this is that there are very low maintenance asset costs associated with this. To kind of compare and contrast this, if you were to buy a piece of real estate with your IRA, which a lot of our clients do, I would say probably a solid 40% of our clients here at Advanta purchase real estate directly. Well, if you bought that piece of real estate, your IRA owns it. Real estate has things like taxes every year, property taxes that have to be paid. You got to pay for insurance. You got to pay for maintenance on the property. I mean, heck, you pay for things like water heaters and roofs. There's so many different things that come up when it comes to investing in real estate that are expenses. Now, granted, if you own the real estate directly, and with what the past few years have shown us in real estate prices, you just tend to make a lot of money on the sale of that property if you own it. Granted, there are a lot more expenses and potential concerns, but you got to pay all those from the IRA. If your IRA is the lender on the property, you basically just get to sit back and collect your money every month, or whatever the actual periodization of the loan is. But you don't have to do anything besides just paying the administrative costs for having the IRA at Advanta, which are very low indeed. And most people write it into the note that the part of the term of the note is that the fees for the IRA are paid by the lender or paid by the borrower. So essentially, you can get your account for free and then also make a profit, which is pretty cool in my opinion. But again, you don't have to pay for things like roofs, water heaters, putting tenants in, replacing toilets, all those kind of things that you'd have to do and worry about with an IRA that on property goes away. Excuse me. It goes away when you lend on property instead of owning it. And the other thing is that if you maybe don't necessarily have enough money to make a deal happen with your IRA, lending and partnering are much simpler than buying and partnering. So if you want to bring a few people together on a deal to make a loan happen, it is much easier to bring multiple lenders in on a note than it is to bring in multiple buyers in on a piece of property. So that's another really good benefit, is that it allows for scalability of multiple people to come together and partner on a particular deal, and while also reducing the asset maintenance overhead and potential liability issues for your IRA as well. So a lot of great benefits. But again, one of the downturns is that especially if you're lending on a piece of real estate, you might have the issue of missing out on the appreciable gain and value of the property when it sells. Your due your basis and any other consideration on the note. And that's one of the cool things about equity participation, is that it kind of bridges that gap between owning property and lending on it by being able to make some profits on the appreciable value gain of the property. All right. So let's go through some case studies. We got about 20 more minutes, and again, please do ask some questions. I know this is more of an entry-level presentation, but again, I always like to answer any questions. I want to be a resource for y'all. Okay, we got a question here. Let's see. Can your self-directed IRA be used as? Can your self-directed IRA be a borrower from another person's IRA? Because my understanding is that if I want to purchase real estate but don't have enough cash in my IRA, that I likely can't get a traditional mortgage? Great question. And again, happy to answer anything, even if it is a little bit divergent from the topic we're on. Before we get into the case study, let's address this. So if you want to buy real estate directly instead of lending on someone's real estate deal, you can definitely do that. The requirements, though, are that it be what's called non-recourse financing. Now, this is very common in commercial multifamily, industrial, larger pieces of real estate purchasing. And essentially what it means is that you as the IRA owner are not pledging any personal collateral or extending any personal credit to the deal. And the IRA as the borrower, if it were to default, the lender could only come after the underlying property securing the note. They couldn't come after any other types of assets in the IRA or any other assets you own. Simply just the property that is encumbered by that note is going to make the lender whole in that case. Now, another consideration to give is that you do potentially move into having a potentially taxable situation with your IRA if you do debt finance a real estate purchase, even if it is done correctly, the financing is correctly non-recourse. But there are strategies around that, and they kind of revolve around using solo 401ks and things like that. So that's definitely something to consider. But I think that kind of answers your question is yes, it cannot be a traditional mortgage, has to be fully non-recourse. Another private individual can certainly write the note to it, so long as it's not a disqualified individual, but you definitely have some options there. Let's see. Also, would an LLC I own be a disqualified person if I lend to it? So this is kind of one of those bit of a gray area. So on face value, like just snap answer, no, but there's an asterisk. It depends on how much of that entity you own or control. It also depends on how much of the it depends on how much of the entity you actually own or control, and then also whom is going to be signing that note, and then also making sure that the financing could not otherwise have been acquired from any other resource. Essentially, you're not just using your IRA as a last ditch lifeline for your business. So there's definitely some shades of gray with it. Is there potential for it to be done? Yes, it is not a hard no for lending to an LLC you own or control. But more often than not, it is a no, but the answer can be yes sometimes. Let's see, got another question, and then we'll get into the case studies. Do I understand correctly that my IRA cannot loan money to myself or any immediate family member? Yes, you do understand that 100% correctly. Any direct lineal descendant or ascendant of you directly. So think about your family tree directly up and down. However, in the IRS's infinite wisdom and their regulatory writing, they don't consider siblings to be disqualified individuals. So if you have a brother or a sister that's killing it in the real estate investing business, and you want to lend them money on a project, you are welcome to do so. But again, that would seem to me to be an issue, but the IRS doesn't have one with it. So again, it's anyone immediate nuclear family, but once you get out that and you start talking about aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, they're fair game. So if you want to invest with them, by all means. I see a hand raised. Please do ask questions if you got them. Let's get into the first case study. All right. Paul has 120 grand in an IRA and wants more consistent terms with the investing that he's doing. He meets a private mortgage broker. So kind of going back to the person that was looking for someone to do compliance or screening of borrowers, this is a great way to do it. There are mortgage brokers that work directly with investors to do all of the kind of more traditional verifications that you would think, like, all the hoops you have to jump through when you borrow money to buy your personal home, that can do that and screen the potential borrowers for a particular deal you're looking to put together. So Paul vets the property and the borrower along with the mortgage broker and agrees on lending $120,000 at 8% with a 5-year balloon. The monthly payment is $800 and it's secured by a first mortgage on the property. So what this means is Paul's lent 120 grand to an investor. He holds the first position on the property, meaning that if the person doesn't pay, he's first in line to be able to collect that property as repayment of the debt. And in 5 years, that there is a balloon of any unpaid principal on that particular property. So monthly payments are $800 a month. So how it works, he opens and funds the IRA account. He finds the loan and analyzes the terms. He makes the offer to lend on his own terms, lets us know, and then we send out closing instructions and ultimately review any particular loan documents as well, and then ultimately fund it after everything's been approved by the client. So after close, borrower sends the monthly money, interest-only payment directly to the Advanta account. So it's all being deposited completely tax-free into the IRA directly. And then 3 years later, the borrower decides to sell the house, and Paul's IRA receives the 120 grand at sale. Paul's IRA made $28,800 in interest. That's $800 monthly payments at 36 payments during the life of the loan. And there is no capital gains and no tax on the accrued interest. So pretty good way to illustrate a very simple and pain-free way that this gentleman made $28,800 without paying a cent in taxes. Now, a lot of people, again, if there's fees that need to be paid anywhere on this, will just roll that into maybe points up front on the loan or some type of origination that the borrower has to pay. Remember, these people need your money, and you can charge for that service. So keep in mind that there are a lot of creative ways to try to increase your profits and decrease your expenses when it comes to lending people money. All right, we got a question. Let's see. What if you lend to a sister on a primary home? You said as an investment, but can it be the mortgage holder on a sibling's home they live in? And can you visit them and sleep there, which would normally be a disqualification? So there's a few, let's break this down into a few different parts. So can you lend to a sibling for the purchase of a new property that they're going to live in? Yes, you absolutely can. If it's going to be their primary residence, I would, well, those not required, I would strongly, with a capital S, strongly encourage you to do that through a mortgage broker that can do all of the Dodd-Frank compliance and everything like that, because there are a lot of regulations on lending people money that came out of the 2008 financial crisis, of lending people money on a home that they're going to be using for personal residence. So making sure that everything is buttoned and done correctly is incredibly important in that. So first off, could you do that? Yeah, sure. And could you visit them and sleep there? Well, if your IRA owned a property, one, your sister couldn't live there, neither could you. But in this case, it gets to be a little bit more of a gray area. I would say, if you were to argue that to the IRS, would they have a problem with it? If you're not living there and you're just going and visiting your sister for a weekend, probably not. But it's not for me to make that determination. I would say it definitely would be a touch of a gray area. With that said, the IRS is not, knocking on everyone's door every day to make sure that people aren't, violating IRS rules. So take that for what it's worth, but, just understand that there might be a touch of a gray area. Is it something as prohibited as lending your son money from your IRA? Absolutely not. Is it something as prohibited from owning your personal residence with your IRA? Of course not. But again, there is a slight shade of gray with that, arguments can be made. But again, not for me to say, but it's definitely probably on the more mild end of that spectrum. Let's see. Can both the IRA of a disqualified person and my IRS can both the IRA of a disqualified person and my IRA invest in the same investment, an LLC that has no other owners? Yeah, if it's from the onset. So let's say your IRA and the IRA of a disqualified. Let's just, for argument's sake, let's say this is your IRA and your wife's IRA, your spouse's IRA. So you and your spouse want to use your IRA funds to invest into an LLC. Sure. If it's for a newly formed LLC or an LLC that someone else owns that's a non-disqualified individual, and you both want to have your IRAs be members or purchase that membership, go right ahead, not a problem. What you need to consider later on down the road is that those percentages of initial investment equity cannot change. So if y'all want to use your IRAs, the spouse's IRA and your IRA, then, if you wanted to add more money into that LLC in the future, you would have to do it in the same proportions that the equity was split up. So if it's a $200,000 LLC and both y'all put in 100 grand, but let's say your spouse had, an extra $20,000 in her IRA, and you didn't really have any appreciable more money in your IRA. If you wanted to add that additional 20 grand into the IRA, into that investment, into that LLC as a capital contribution, that would effectively inflate her position and deflate your IRA LLC's position, which would be a prohibited transaction. So while the partnership itself isn't an issue, you need to have a little bit of forethought, look at that crystal ball a little bit and see down the road if there are any potential issues that you might run into, because there certainly could be, from that aspect. Okay, I got some more questions, but let's make sure we get. We'll definitely answer all those, but I just want to make sure we get through the case studies because we're running a little bit up on time. Okay, equity partnership. I find these really interesting. That's why I included in here for y'all. So Andrea has 150 grand in an IRA, and she's interested in partnering up with a rehab to flip a house. She meets Steve at a local investors group, and Steve has a project that he needs funding. Tale as old as time. Investors that need money and people with money looking to invest. Andrea does her due diligence on Steve and the property he's looking to flip. She thinks it's a good deal. She has plenty of experience investing in real estate, so she feels comfortable doing this. So Steve agrees to use the property for collateral and use some of his own funds as a down payment on the property. Andrea agrees to loan him the rest of the funds, and the amount includes funds needed to purchase and rehab the property. So, loan terms, what does this look like? The loan amount is 125 grand. The interest rate is 5%, and the equity participation is going to be 1/3 of the profits. So 33% of the profits of the sale of the property are going to be kicked back to the IRA at the sale. And then there's a 2-year balloon on the note. So this is not like some type of 30-year thing where it's going to go out in perpetuity later on down the road. It's got a 2-year balloon on it, 1/3 of the profits at sale with 5% interest. And again, these notes typically have lower interest rates. You're going to see 5 to 1% on these a lot of the time, because you're going to get that added benefit of having, a big chunk of the profits or a chunk of the profits go back to the actual lender, in this case, the IRA. Monthly payment is $520, and Andrea is holding the first mortgage on the property. Andrea's attorney prepares all the note and mortgage. We provide them with the language to use for the IRA as the lender, and then Advanta IRA holds the note and recorded mortgage after the actual funding. The loan payoff. Steve is ready to sell the property for 200 grand net after closing costs. He requests the payoff amount. The loan servicer in this case provides the payoff letter, and it's sent to closing. So what does this look like? So Andrea initially lent out $125,000 on the initial loan. The monthly payments of $3,000 and 25%, and the percent of the profits, which was 33% of the profits, is 25 grand. Her total earnings in this amount of time is $28,000. Steve's earnings, the original loan was $125,000. So after he pays that back, the sale of the house was $200,000. He repays the loan and the profits, which again, $28,000 has to go back additionally to the borrower, to Andrea's IRA, and then his total earnings on this deal is 47 grand. So he does well. Andrea does well. Rising tides raising all ships in this case. So you can really kind of see how this benefits everyone if you can give the rehabber more of an ability to use more of the money that they are borrowing to improve and maybe fix and flip something quicker. And then also protecting, and then also getting a good benefit on your side for decreasing the amount of upfront interest and maybe the amount of payment by getting something on the back end. So shifting around where you're going to make your money, again, can be hugely beneficial. We covered this a little bit, and we'll kind of get through this pretty quickly. You don't have to have real estate as the collateral. It can be other types of investments. Just keep in mind that if it is something that is a disqualified investment, you have to be careful as that in the event of default, how are you going to collect on that? If the note is secured by stock in a company, you need to check to see how that business is taxed in case your IRA ends up owning the stock, because that could be an issue. And then things like S corps cannot have IRA shareholders. So again, just kind of illustrates there's a lot of different things you need to look at with that if you're not going to use real estate as the collateral. But again, just because it's non-real estate doesn't mean you can't do it. And then lastly, unsecured lending. Remember, you don't have to have security on the note, but you are going to be taking on a higher degree of risk if you do that, because if the person one day decides, hey, I'm not going to pay, well, you don't get the added benefit of walking down to the courthouse and showing a judge non-payment and then taking the property. You have to say, okay, well, I'm going to sue this person, and then if they're not paying your debt, the likelihood that they have money to pay other people or you in general, probably pretty low. So in this case, Tom's loan deal. Tom has 50 grand in a SEP IRA. He has a friend that wants to expand his business and needs some short-term capital. He decides to lend him money from the SEP IRA and is willing to lend the money without any collateral. So he's just going to lend his buddy the 50 grand to improve the business. The loan term, again, short term, 50 grand, 10%, 1-year balloon note, and a lump sum payment of $55,000. Because there's no title company involved, Advanta IRA must have the original note in our possession before funding. And since the unsecured lending is riskier than conventional mortgages, the interest rates tend to be a little higher as well than credit cards. And that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, I am here to answer them. I believe we did have a couple other questions. Let's see. There we go. My IRA can't invest in an LLC of which myself and a disqualified individual are the members, correct? Yes, if it's already an existing LLC, you cannot then in turn purchase beneficial interest into that LLC, unfortunately. Any other questions? We're hitting right up kind of on 12 or 1 o'clock, so I want to make sure everyone gets out of here if they have other things to do. If you do have any other questions, make sure you fire those off. The handouts are attached as the slides are attached as a handout as well. Let's see. I've seen language about checkbook access. How does that work? That is a question I'm certainly happy to answer, but shoot me an email if you want to get a little bit more on that, because it's not as simple as something to kind of just fire off an answer to this, but I'm certainly happy to answer those questions on checkbook things. Recording, yes, the link will be emailed out, but you can always check our YouTube page. It's typically up same day or next day. Regarding investing, investing to the entity, lending to the entity, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but more often than not, no, you cannot lend to an entity that's owned wholly by disqualified individuals. Rare instances, yes, but again, it's one of those kind of things that needs to be done a little bit more forensically and looking at the actual deal. Happy to kind of go through those rules with you, but yeah, it's not as easy as kind of a yes or no question. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We greatly appreciate your attendance on these things. I hope every one of you got something beneficial out of this. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or give me a call. I am always happy to review things in detail with you. And with that said, have a great rest of your day.